Welcome back to the Resilience Pod, the podcast helping you become resilient in our world full of disruptions. I'm your host, Rina Singh, and today we're in the studio with a very incredible guest. But before I introduce you to him, I have a question for you all. When was the last time you took a step back and thought about the information that you're consuming via social media, your work, or even the news? Did you think about whether it's true? Well, this is particularly important in times of crisis, especially when things can seem uncertain. So my next guest is going to help us figure that out. But before I do another quick intro to him, he is someone that I have been following for a long time, and I'm a huge fan.
Too much already.
He is a seasoned journalist, filmmaker, and author, and has a distinguished career in British broadcasting. Wow.
Wow, it sounds so impressive when you say that.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, I have been a fan of him, and even more so when I discovered his book, The Future of Truth and How to Get There. And considering today's topic, it is only apt that he is our guest, so we can explore the topics and he can help us uncover and become resilient to information in this digital world of deception.
Yes, that's a good phrase.
Yeah. Welcome, Lindley Gooden, to the Resilience Pod.
Lovely to be here. Nice to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
Love your studio.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, you are the first guest in this beautiful studio.
Fantastic.
So really lucky to have you. Now, I have to say, this is a pinch me moment.
Really?
Because I have obviously been following you for a while, came across your book and was super excited when you did an audio version of it.
Yeah.
So you were in my ears on my commute every day to and from work.
Can't escape.
And thinking, gosh, and now I'm sitting here and you're sitting right in front of me and we're talking about this and how it can all link to resilience.
Well, it's brilliant. And I've known your work for a long time too. And actually you interviewed my wife.
Yeah.
who is totally across risk and resilience. And that was it was fascinating. I mean, I learned a lot. I should have asked her myself, really, but I didn't. You did.
Yes, we've got the second trio of the power couple here. But Lindley, look, we're talking about this whole misinformation, information, how that links to it. For the benefit of those who haven't seen your book or not sure who you are, could you give us an overview of the core principles in the book and why this topic is so pertinent and important right now?
Absolutely. Well, I'm Lindley. Hi, I'm a former BBC, ITV Sky journalist for many years. For the last 20 years, been running Green Screen, which is a communications company and working with very large clients. So about 2 years ago, I was sitting around about Christmas time, writing the next year's new communications Bible. What do we do right? What do we do wrong? Yeah. But I stayed longer with customers this time around because I often think about consumers. I was a consumer correspondent. And the story of disinformation just came through. In fact, I couldn't really escape it. So I started writing notes about it into something a bit longer. And Artie turned to me and said, Lindy, you're writing a book. Don't be ridiculous. I've never wanted to. I didn't plan to.
Yeah. What
came out of it, last year was the first edition and second edition is now out, which is, in my opinion, sharper because of the world we're living in. It's the true story of mis and disinformation and how we can fight it. We look at the psychology, we look at neuroscience. There's lots of neuroscience that shows how fake news gets in. And actually we respond through fight, fright and flight. I call it fright and flight because fright is a big part of it. It becomes a new reality. And it's a really quick process. I think we see it around us. We know that younger people are living in realities that perhaps have never existed. Older people are too. It's not just the young, it's older people too. The politics we see around us. Essentially what the book does is take you through the reasons why and how it works on our brains, and then how we start to apply that to journalism. And I was a journalist, so I explain how stories are made and how news works. And we look at the laws and we look at the AI and deepfakes, and we look at the politics. And the second edition is sharper on that. And I have named names. I have been careful, but
controversial.
We are in a world right now where not only our loved ones, but world leaders are using either disinformation or just lots of crazy information to change our minds and change our behaviors. So the book basically takes it to town. I literally learned a lot while I was writing it. I didn't know this stuff. It is fascinating. And it's actually quite simple. If we get scared, if we see a threat, if somebody says that person's to blame for something else that's happening in our life, like we don't have any money, if they're convincing enough, we fall for it. That's the basis.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
I have to say I've read this while I've listened to it,
Yeah.
and it is fantastic. I'm excited for the second edition. And there's
Oh, shall I show it to you?
Yes, please.
This
show
is the
our
very
audience.
first of the second edition. Which camera? Your
We're in the
camera?
middle camera.
That
Let's-
camera?
yes,
That camera?
look at
Oh, that
all
camera's better.
cameras, yeah.
And the middle camera as well.
Love
there we go.
it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not promoting.
Of course not.
No,
but
no,
look,
no.
guys, we need this. Now, backtracking on, you've mentioned two really key important
Yeah.
words here, and that's misinformation and disinformation. And so personally, recently I was at a conference and these two words were used very interchangeably.
Yes.
So before we get more deeper into
Yeah,
this
yeah.
whole topic, explain not just by definition what misinformation and disinformation means, but what is the psychological impact
Yeah.
that can have on individuals and businesses?
Absolutely. So yes, they are. Often people say misinformation. That's often the kind of the umbrella term, and some would say that is the umbrella term. But I would say there are two types of bad information that changes our minds and makes us do things we wouldn't, as tolerant, nice people, normally do. Let's start with disinformation. Disinformation is the intentional stuff.
Right.
It's when somebody creates a story with an ulterior motive to change our minds, to make us vote for them, to buy their products. It could be propaganda. It could be commercial disinformation. But that's the intentional stuff. And you could also say, and you would be right to say this, that lots of the bots and a lot of them from countries that we know of, for instance, Russia, that is disinformation too. It's intentional.
Yeah.
Often bots create a rumor, and then what happens? We take over, and that's where misinformation comes in. Misinformation is the iceberg beneath it, and it's the stuff that we do. So if we share a story that we don't fully know is true, but it's come from a friend, so it's bound to be okay, surely, or it's something that we really believe in because our core beliefs say immigration is wrong, or that person has taken all the money from us, or that person's on benefits. If your core beliefs, the negative ones, are tapped into by this new bit of information, you might spread it. Basically, that is the biggest problem. It's where they both break down trust.
Yeah.
But misinformation comes from our loved ones and the people we trust online. And so that's, for me, the most dangerous thing. We've got to really look at what we're sharing, and we've got to look at what we're liking, and just hold back 30% of your disbelief. Every story has some bias in it. Once we know who we are and what we believe in, we can start to spot the stories that jangle our core beliefs. So and you asked about the business side of it as well. It has an impact on business because we walk this stuff into the business.
Yeah.
When we cross the threshold with beliefs and perhaps ideas of the world, if we're an investor, we may invest in something that, look at crypto. We essentially, with mis and disinformation, there is no barrier between your personal life and your work life over time.
Right.
That's the difficulty. So I would say it seems like a cultural thing, pure cultural, but actually we make decisions and we get on with each other, and the business operates based on our relationships. And also, if somebody's screaming loudly in our ear about something that somebody else on the opposite desk doesn't believe in, you may not get on with them. This can cause a rot within a business. And I think to be resilient in terms of mis and disinformation in business is to have a conversation with your people, to understand who they are, where they're coming from, and to have resources so that you can have an honest conversation about these things, and perhaps bring people into the middle ground where that side and the other side is roughly true.
Gosh, fascinating, isn't it? And it's really interesting that you said that you've highlighted the key differences, because I think that's where people get confused. And personally, even I get confused.
You could say, I mean,
they sound similar.
we want a different world. We want different words. And so occasionally I'll go with the word disinformation is lies.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
love that.
lies.
Yeah, it's lies.
Misinformation is us talking about the stuff that probably isn't true.
Yeah. And based on misinformation, do you think businesses tend to focus too much on that instead of the disinformation stuff?
Yeah, so there is reputational harm potentially involved in all of this. So misinformation, yes, it's us talking, okay?
Yeah.
But disinformation could be that somebody is going to say something online that isn't true about your brand. And that will cause you issues because, okay, so first of all, it's embarrassing. It may not be true. It probably isn't true. Certainly if it's disinformation, because that's by definition untrue. But it can have an impact on you. And I think what we should be really doing is having a conversation internally to understand that this stuff is all around us, in particular with younger people who haven't had the the many years, sadly, of my life where we weren't online.
Yeah.
I was a very early adopter. In the 90s, I was emailing people. I was an academic, so I was able to email people.
Yeah.
But this only came up, really, the world turned in the 2010s after the financial crash. Our lives were a bit more difficult. It got worse, rapidly worse during COVID. But younger people are going into businesses and working, and they're great people. I will just give you a story in a second, but they're great people. They've just been surrounded for their entire lives with a trust issue. And the trust issue is, how do I know what's true? So somebody I'm working with, very young guy, he's a cameraman. Green Screen's a production company, a communications agency, and no names, but this guy is brilliant. He's a fantastic technician. He's a camera person. He's a director. He's just really, really good. And he turned to me, I was chairing an event recently, and he turned to me and said, I just don't know what's true. I can't trust anybody because once disinformation gets in and misinformation takes over as the iceberg, trust breaks down. So where do you go? And I said to him, look, okay, here's the advice that I gave to him. It may help that we can all think about this for our loved ones. I said, look, the facts are out there. We kind of equate the facts with the truth. Actually, the truth, it kind of has a big question why something's happened. So we inject our own belief as to why that government must have done this to us. That's probably not true. Yeah. But if we think about the facts are the 5 W's, and I put an H in. So what, when, where, who, and why. That's the 5th W. We'll get onto that at the last. So they're basically what happened, when did it happen, what were the details? Boring, but essential. And then the how kind of, in some ways for me as a journalist, substitutes the why, because you often don't know the why. Yeah. That's where the idea of truth comes in. But how did it happen? Kind of, what were the mechanisms? Now, this is all, as I say in the book, facts are boring. They're just boring. They don't have any of the intrigue or the gossip or the human stories or the why, really. But they are essentially the only place to go. So I said to this young man, the facts are in the stories that you're reading. Go to the mainstream channels. You might hate them, and he does. Mainstream news, he suspects, because you're supposed to suspect mainstream news. But if you look at the stories and just flick around, everyone's able to do that. Flick around a couple of the channels, kind of know where they're coming from, know where you're coming from, and the facts will be in there. Now, you can walk away at that point. Or you can go to one of the extreme channels that you're looking at or you're listening to, as long as you balance it up with the other side. It's frustrating, but you can start to do that really quickly. And so in the book, the first edition and now the second edition with a lot more practical examples, you can actually really quickly flick through what people are saying and understand the truth. And understand what the disinformation and misinformation, what the effect it's having on you. Because it's making you feel. It's making you feel threatened. And it's making you feel upset. And we want to walk away from that.
And that's the fear part that comes in, which you also talk about. But backtracking on that, I really like when you say, look at both sides, the bigger picture. And this is where I know you're all guilty of this, because I have been too, is only looking at one side that fits with your beliefs. So I love when you say, look at both sides. And in your book, I remember listening to it and you were saying, also look at who's actually bringing out the information, like who owns it. And I know we're going a bit off topic with the questions.
No, it's okay.
I think it's really important, because that was a bit of an aha moment to me when I was walking around London listening to you in my ears. You think, like, who actually owns the stuff that you're reading? That was interesting. Could you just elaborate a bit on that?
In brief, for sure. I think one of the biggest parts of the entire journey we take in the Future of Truth is about your core beliefs, but also what about their core beliefs? I think we all know that we may not know the true why. We weren't in the room when the conspiracy was hatched. There's a lot of conspiracy talk.
If only,
a huge chapter.
Right?
We weren't there. We don't know really why. We can suspect it, but we have to just put that away for a second. But what you can do with things like media channels and certainly people like Andrew Tate and those guys, you know who they are. They're showing you. You know that they are extreme and that they are putting stuff out there that may not be true. Okay, that's just a fact. I think we all know that, but we often just need to be part of something. And so we choose to believe that. We choose to get angry about the others because we have status in that group. We have an identity. In fact, it's really human. Now, I'm a journalist, right? I'm not a psychologist, but I've interviewed probably 50, maybe 55,000 people in my lifetime. And so you have to do a quick bit of cheap armchair psychology just to get to know them. Know if they're scared, know if they're angry, know if they're coming from here or coming from there. And so that's the process. If you can just remember that channel over there is far right or far left or somewhere in the middle, you can start to just go, okay, I get it. Now I'll say it again, suspend 30% of your disbelief. Don't fall for a story just because somebody you like has said it, because it's not true. So that's the thing. Now that leaves you in a bit of a wasteland of, well, okay, I can't trust anybody, can I? Yes, you can. You can trust yourself when you've got good instincts and judgment that perhaps that's over there, and I'm somewhere in the middle. And I say, you said about, and I'll come back to you in a second. We'll get back to resilience. But the most important place that any of us can be to feel better about the information we're seeing and the diet we're taking in, and to feel that you can also talk about stuff that's important to you, is to understand the other side. So listen to the other side as much as you do your own. You already know your side. But if we can do that, what we do then is we hover around the middle ground where all the facts are. The facts aren't in the extremes. The facts are all around the middle. It just happened. That's what happened. It doesn't need your opinions to be true. The facts just are. So that's where you need to be. And once we get there, once you start, just push away the fear and the feeling. Just a little bit. We're going to feel things. I feel things every day. I think you do too. Really extreme feeling. I'm really furious about the state of the world, but that fury isn't helping me at all.
No.
That's not helping me. So bring it down, stand back for a second. And I've got a phrase: stop, step back, and sidestep. If you stop just for a moment, it breaks the chain. It breaks your chimp brain from what it's doing to you. The feeling's all there in the amygdala. And your human brain starts getting, you go, oh, okay, that might or might not be true. And what are you doing? You're calming yourself down. And suddenly, because disinformation works on an emotional brain, not so much on a cool head is a clear head. So if you can just stop that for a second, you disrupt the process, and suddenly you're able to start practicing looking at the other side and looking at the other channels.
I absolutely love that, because I'm going to skip a question here and go on to this. Leads really, it's a nice segue into how we communicate in a crisis in terms of business. And the old PR book says that we have to be the first to control the narrative. Now you've just said, let's take a step back, sidestep, you know, and everything's all a rush now, isn't it, today? So how can businesses find that right balance between speed and accuracy, considering you've just said, take a step back with this?
Absolutely. So look, absolutely. I've worked with a lot of clients over the years. So during the financial crisis, all those years ago, I was working with Which, and they became the number one spokespeople in the UK on banking, because they were trusted. I made sure that we chose really great people, and they were just really human and authentic, right? So that leads into this. Speed is the enemy of accuracy in many ways, but you have to react quickly. When something happens, when a crisis happens, you know, well, what do you do? Well, I think a lot of people will realize you need to first of all, have a good plan in place. Who are we? What's our tone of voice? What do we want to say? Have that plan in place already. But then in all of your communications, I'm not saying control it. Don't just sort of censor everybody, and whether you want this variety of voices around who you are. And that needs to happen today and tomorrow and the next day. Because when a crisis happens, you're going to be flustered. You've got your plan, you bring out your massive manual of rules and policies and what we're allowed to say and what we're not. That's not helping you. You need to be able to be there and answer questions from the public, from your partners very quickly. So if you can do the work today and practice and get out there and create your content and talk and build relationship through your media, what you're going to have then, you're going to be ready, and it's going to be one step forward in a time of crisis. But your relationship's better, your brand is better, your reputation's better. And any attack on your reputation, whether that's disinformation or a real event, you can then, you've got a well-oiled, friendly, human machine. But I would say clarity is important. Say what you can when you can, and say you'll be back. It's one of the clear lines I've said to all of my crisis clients over the years. You know, just, you can't do everything right now. Just say, it's an emerging situation. Things are changing. I'll be back.
Yeah. And I think that's why, so those of you who are listening who are crisis management professionals particularly, that's where we find that a bit challenging, whether can we say that or not. And I was actually running an exercise with a colleague recently on that, and there was a bit of debate on that as well. So it's really interesting that you say that, and it's okay. I think the learning behind this is it's okay to do that, because you might as well say that than start spreading more false information.
The lack of information is a killer. And I just first of all, you need to make sure that if it's a crisis, if it's a disaster, if there are people hurt, they're the first people on your minds. You need to make sure that their families, the people affected are helped and dealt with first of all. They're the most important voices. Yeah. And then clarity, yes. But the thing I didn't mention, and it's so important, it kind of feeds into this, having many voices around the tone of voice you want, is authenticity, number one in our day and age. Now, look, the American model for crisis communications and the model over here for until probably recently, and many still carry it, especially in financial services and medicine and so on, is say nothing. Yeah. Press release, nothing. Yeah. Now, look, that seems safe. It seems controllable. But I tell you what, social media will go on without you. Yeah. If you don't say something, somebody else who is authentic will take that from you. You need to be the place to go. And one of the things we spoke about beforehand was, what can a company do now? Well, absolutely. Make sure that you are the place that people go for reliable information. Yeah. So in terms of resilience, I know I've talked, the book is for all of us. Yeah. But in terms of a resilient business, just get those cogs turning now and be yourself and be human, because if you're not, somebody else online will be. Yeah. And that's a scary thing, isn't it? Yeah. But there is the reality. So very, very interesting. Yeah, absolutely. There. Have you ever come across a company in your experience that have just thought, we're just going to let it blow over and just kind of put it under the rug and see what happens with this whole misinformation, disinformation? Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm being asked to talk to companies at the moment. Okay. Probably at quite a human level. Yeah. There's a conference coming up on safeguarding, which is interesting, and they want me to talk about disinformation. And it's interesting. Again, I haven't written this thing. I'm not sure what I'll say yet, but it's translating across. Yeah. So I would say the conversation is starting. Yeah. It's not reached businesses yet, but people in their own lives know how important it is. Yeah. And there is no disjoint. If your company has people in it, if your company is made of all AIs, you've got the same problem. The data will be biased. So true. It doesn't matter. So true. We are walking this stuff into our business. So so I would say nearly every business I've worked with has going from there to here. And here is a place of authenticity and a place where you can communicate clearly with your audience, whoever that might be. But it's always a journey, and it takes an advocate in the business, somebody who really cares, who's got control of that process and that project. They often go by the wayside again, but to show willing on something like this, it's a real investment in your health, your cultural health as a company. It's also about your reputation, about your public face. We are all tense at the moment. We're recording this spring, almost summer. And we're living in a world where things don't feel very true. Yeah. It's very hard, and we feel the threat. The news is full of it. It probably will be for years to come. So we need to handle this stuff. Yeah. And that's our personal lives and our business lives. Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me to my next segment of question. And it would be really remiss if I didn't ask you this, because it's everywhere. And I feel like I know the answer to this, but do entertain us, because there might be some people watching thinking, I don't really believe in it. But we're talking about AI deepfakes. Yeah. And we've seen deepfake videos already impersonating CEOs. We're trying to manipulate the stock market, even elections. So how long, I'm laughing as I'm saying this question to you, how long before AI generated misinformation becomes an unavoidable part of our life? Zero time. It's right here. It is right here. Yeah. So one of the weird things that came through when I was writing the first edition, it's even more now, because the tools have moved on so exponentially fast. Massively. Video. It used to be that text was our enemy, disinformation in stories and text, and maybe, and then it became audio. Audio is really hard to spot. Video is now coming through as really hard to spot. And isn't that scary as well? Is it? So that's great. You said that. it is scary, but we need to make it less scary.
Okay.
So the key to this is, again, the response to this digital revolution is to sharpen up our analog instincts, our human instincts. So it is scary. Like and remember that emotion that you just felt. It is scary. And so what we need to do is take that fright out of it and think, okay, well, how can I spot it? So there's a big set of deepfake tests. I say big, it's a few pages in the book and a few minutes in the audiobook. And essentially what you can do, first of all, I'll be a broken record. Just hold back that belief for a minute. So now you can keep your emotions down and you won't be scared. Because unfortunately, when we're frightened or nervous or tense, we don't see things clearly. So calm that down. And then essentially there are some technical tells which are being reduced rapidly. Things like wobbly hair or your mouth. When you see a person speaking, it's often the disinformation is really about somebody important or controversial saying something they didn't. So look at their eyes, look at their mouth. Do they synchronize? Does the mouth synchronize with the words? Now we're taking that stuff in naturally, but we're not noticing it. So if we can just notice it and just say, that feels a bit, they call it uncanny valley. It's cognitive dissonance. It just feels off. That's the scary bit. Use your emotions differently. And suddenly you can start to, first of all, do technical tells. The number one deepfake test, and I don't want to give everything away, but this is something we could all work on today, is to think about context.
Okay.
Would you, Rina, would you say something crazy about something random online today? No. Context is very important. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, really friend of mine, who is very well known. He's a financial expert. He's on TV. He was one of the very first celebrities in the UK to be deepfaked. And he was suddenly promoting a business deal, which clearly he would never do. That was my first note. And so my brother sent this clip to me, and it was a very famous one. He's I think he's suing them. So there are legal issues that I won't get into. But what did I do? I saw my brother sent me the video, said, is this true? That's scary. Is this true? Is it a deep fake? And I said, okay. So the mouth wasn't moving quite in the right way. The quality wasn't quite there. The quality is improving. But ultimately, would he have ever done that? Of course not. Stop, step back and sidestep. Look, you can go somewhere else to check it. Just literally break the chain, move away. And I think that's, and this is it's a skill, it's a muscle. We need to just get used to that process. Because
like you said, we know these things are not quite right, but we often ignore our instinct.
Because our core beliefs say that, that's terrible. That's awful. I mean, there are so many situations in the world and wars and crises in the world right now that we see every day. Of course, it makes I think rightly, it makes us very sad for the victims of things around the world that are just horrific. Up and down, they're horrific. Of course, they make us feel. But what we need to do is make sure that doesn't turn into bias, prejudice, that then we can't see the facts when they present themselves. So that's the trick. And I think that's true in business as well. We've talked about resilience, but also in business decision making. If you can't handle the facts, if you refuse to believe certain facts, or if, for instance, your culture is closed and you might want to find out, you want to work out the health of your business. If you've got a closed culture and one that can't speak up, then you've got a big problem. Truth capital is a very important element. And if you've got a culture where people are scared to speak out, which is very traditional, then you won't understand what they're thinking. You won't understand the decisions being made. And it's really, it just breeds a negative culture for the future. And
I'm going to talk to you about truth capital in a minute, but I want to go back to the deepfake. Deepfake. We could spend like an hour talking about this because it's one of those.
It's changing,
So on Netflix, there was a show and it's all about deepfake and it's all about government. I don't know if you've seen it. I can't remember what it's called.
The Capture.
Yes.
It was a BBC series. I loved it.
I absolutely loved it too. And the whole kind of situation where they're interviewing
that's right.
a prominent person and he's not even in the room was fascinating. And it just really hit home that, wow, this is not a case of, oh, you're on a Zoom call and someone's asking for $50 million or pounds or whatever it might be. This is so much technology.
It was a story of London cops, sort of, what are they? They were kind of, fairly high up in anti-terrorism and so on. And so in the first series, there was a killer going around and they weren't caught on CCTV because they were wiping the CCTV live using kind of deep faking it. And then they were inserting people who hadn't committed a crime into footage. This is one of the things I deal with later in the book in terms of the applications of deepfakes. Just be aware of it. I mean, I haven't checked this out, so this could very well be misinformation. I don't intend it to be, so it's not disinformation. But I think, and I've certainly read this, but I can't guarantee it. I would have to check it really. But that can happen. That you can, yes, you can insert, but you can remove from live footage. Now, you need everyone listening and watching us needs to check that out because that may be untrue.
Check your facts.
That may be untrue. And that is scary because it could be used. But in the second series, they go to live TV and news, and people do suspect news at the moment.
They do.
They do. They don't like it because I use social media. I don't, but people would say, and I went out last year and did some vox pop people on the street about where they get the information from. I get all my information from TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. I mean, it's potentially dangerous.
Yes, absolutely.
Potentially very dangerous. But the mainstream news would never be faked for long. And in the second series, they fake news night. A politician's not saying what he's not saying, and he's in a room somewhere and he's being interviewed live. So, in principle, it could happen with pre-recorded stuff, with on-demand stuff. But I tell you what, I can tell you from my experience in many years in news, if that ever happened in the real world, the news would absolutely go to town on it. Within seconds, there would be such an outrage, such an uproar from news channels. So the second series probably isn't correct. The first series could be.
It's just fascinating.
But it's good anyway.
Yeah, it's good. Fascinating to kind of get into that. But we're going to stop that segment there because, again, we could just talk on this. I want to now go, because you mentioned it earlier, the truth capital. So in chapter 4, you mentioned that, and I thought that was quite interesting, that businesses need to invest in trust before a crisis hits, making it quite business specific. So can you share an example of a company that's done this really well?
Yeah, so I work with a company, I'm sure they won't mind me mentioning it, South Eastern Railway, serving London and Kent. And look, it's interesting because trust is very hard to achieve when you're a business.
Yeah.
People naturally suspect you, don't necessarily trust you unless your brand is so cool. Innocent Smoothies were very cool, and I'm sure they still are, but the brand is that's what engenders trust really, and also the product. Yeah. But the Southeastern says what they do, they're always under pressure.
Yeah.
Trains break down all the time. They don't arrive on time. Customers are unhappy. The voice of Kent can be quite loud. So, it's a job. Yeah. So I know the guys in charge of this, and they're brilliant. They're lovely. They really care, even though it's a tough job and reputations are hard to handle sometimes. And so they put in their incident control center, their social media sort of hub is two seats away from where the call comes in that there's a crisis happening. Okay, yeah. They've integrated, and it's true of other control centers too, they've integrated so much that the moment something happens, it's out there on multiple channels. The job was to make it consistent, and that took time. But they've invested in lots of new tech that allows that to happen. Maybe your passenger information boards are carrying the same information as Twitter, as X is. But they just take it really seriously. I mean, geekily seriously. It's a passion. And I think that's interesting. So if it's possible to make sure that you're informing your customers or your partners really, really quickly and well. Now, being a train company is very different to being a bank. Yeah. But the principle does apply, which is good practice is to make sure you're listening, you're learning, and you're applying your learning to the customer. Putting the customer first, yes, but your team is equally important. Yeah. So what they've done basically is shortcut the journey from crisis to information, and I think that's really good. I've seen it working. It's they have very fast fingers,
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite good. Now, if you're curious, audience, do check out that chapter, as it's quite interesting. Now, following up from that, Lindley, is there a risk of overcorrecting misinformation and that leading to censorship?
On the first part, yes, definitely. You need to be across things. Yeah. But I think relationship's very important here. And censorship, for me, brings up the idea of free speech. So look, free speech, and I've gone to town with that in the second edition, because in the first one it was there, but it's being used so much by certain world leaders at the moment.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Free speech is there to defend the people without defense, people, the voiceless, the whistleblowers. It's designed to help the people. Free speech is not designed and should not be used to throw out hatred. It's not an offensive tool, it's a defensive tool. So censorship is an interesting one. If a company tries to really rigidly control the messaging or the information that's going out, it comes across as Big Brother. Absolutely, it does. And so I would say good practice has always been, and it's just, if you care about what you do as a business, you express it. Less corporate messaging, more authenticity, more clarity, explain stuff. If you do that, I tell you what, people respect you for it. And even if they don't like you because of something that's happened, they really appreciate being explained what's really going on. If you hide behind corporate messaging, it's never been a good idea. I've never liked it. I've never trained a client to use the word leverage.
Okay.
I'm not going to leverage that word at all.
It's just a very good point.
Take out the corporate words and jargon a bit, and the messaging, and make sure you're talking to the people. That's really important. So, and then it won't come across as censorship, because yes, you want to handle misinformation. In fact, you could say you always want to handle that misinformation, but having a conversation with people, understanding where they're coming from, and then saying, actually, this is what's really going on, is a much better way of doing it.
Why do these strategies feel so simple yet so hard to do? Because
there are a lot of people involved, a lot of people with jobs, and a lot of people with positions and status, and it's important that they have a say. So if I'm creating a piece of content for a big company, as I do every day of the week, you can tell when a culture's not working and when it's closed, when you get to version 15 and it looks like version 1. The clients who have a healthy culture and where people can speak and say, it wasn't what I was expecting, but I love that. That's version 2. If that makes sense. The machine and the control, particularly from middle management and senior management, can be so intense that people can't speak out, and that things just end up not, that, Rina. We've all seen it multiple times, hundreds of times possibly. If we don't have a more open way of working, then I'm afraid things like disinformation, misinformation are hard to handle anyway. And it'll spread among your staff. Never mind the outer world. So we have to start talking a bit more healthily, a bit more naturally.
And that leads me to, so we're almost at the end of the questions. I feel like I could ask you about 20 billion more, but
I'll see you next week. I'll be back.
We're about to have a series on this. It's about the roles we have as leaders, staff, members of the public, customers, in battling misinformation. And that's not just during a crisis, but I think I would probably go beyond just always. What is that role beyond corporate strategies? No,
you're absolutely right. I think there is increasingly, because of the prevalence of this stuff, there's no difference between our personal lives and our professional lives in many ways. So I would say it's a very personal, deeply personal issue. We're all feeling it. I wrote this thing. It was so empowering to get through the first edition and then this edition, which is even more really because I've been more honest this time around. I was trying to sit on the fence before, but I think if we can all personally understand the simple mechanism, the reason that it has us, and the effect that false information, like the stuff that we're surrounded with, has on us. If nothing else, it'll give us 20% of our worry back. And
there's a lot of things to worry about in this life, isn't it?
There's plenty in our own lives to worry about.
Exactly.
So I think the next step for any really healthy business, and what do I know? But I would say is to have a real conversation with your staff, your people, about this stuff. Just do a health check, do a temperature check. And you will find, if you can have that conversation, that will involve senior people having an honest conversation. Possibly a one-to-one conversation with a lot of people, because it's so intensely personal. But if we can start to do that, I think you'll find a big cultural shift. This is only one threat that any business has. It seems to be out there. But we are walking this into our office. So let's think about it, and let's just calm the temperature down a bit. Let's calm ourselves down a bit. Realize, yes, it is scary, but it doesn't need to be quite as scary, because we can handle it.
And we need to be, what you say, like truth advocates.
Information guardians, I think was the phrase. Yeah, that's right. We do. We can take back the power, and it's so empowering. I feel so much more across this stuff. I mean, yes, of course I am, having written the book, but I learned as I wrote, as well as knowing a lot about journalism and how stories are created. This is fundamentally human. It happened 100 years ago with fascism. What's happening now? There's a quote in the new edition from Mark Twain. I'll spoil it. Mark Twain, the American writer, said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." I think that is what we're seeing right now around the world. It happened with the printing press. Guess what happened with the printing press? Anti-Jewish hatred and witch trials. When there's a new piece of tech that overtakes our human ability to see what it's doing to us, social media is obviously now, this happens. We get nationalists, we get violent. It's a human fright and flight mechanism. And we start to see the other as being the enemy. We diverge. And if you want to, and this is the thing that we see, if disinformation creators want to weaponize the information, all they have to do is find a really good wedge issue, know what our core beliefs are, and throw it out there. And then entire populations divide. And the World Economic Forum has, for the last 2 years, rated mis and disinformation as the #1 global risk.
Wow.
Because of the impact it has on entire societies, the way we vote, the way we buy, all of the stuff that we do. And that, of course, is business too.
So powerful. Question to the audience and those of you who are listening or watching, is this on your risk registers in your company? Because that would be really interesting. I don't think I would say probably not.
It seems to be out there. Why do we
think about it? It's out there, but do people think about it in such a siloed, like granular thing, but actually it affects everything that we do. So really interesting.
If you monitored the conversations in your business today, you'll probably find that Russia, Trump, Ukraine, they'll be in there somewhere. If you're a UK-based business, or if you're a European business or American business. If you monitor the number of conversations in your office, the water cooler moments, and you're not looking at this, at least as a risk to people's personal lives, you're missing a trick.
Powerful. Right. We are going to go into closing thoughts now, because we're coming to an end with our time together, unfortunately.
It's been good.
It has. So from your perspective and your own experience, and what you believe is most important, could you give us one key action that we can do to be more resilient against misinformation and disinformation?
Absolutely. Number one, check your sources. Where's the information coming from? That's number one. I'll also put an extra one in there. You asked me for one. Is just understand what your core beliefs are, what your biases are. Just have a look. We've all got them. But sources and core beliefs, and you're already on the right track.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Lee, if people want to follow your work, find your book, where can they do so?
Well, you can Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo me, whichever search engine you prefer. I'm everywhere, really. Lindley Gooden, Lindley, and The Future of Truth and How to Get There is out there. And second edition, if you see the first edition, just wave it goodbye. Yes. It's the second edition now. It needed to be updated. The world has turned so much in the last year that there had to be updates all the way through that. So there are. And of course, you can look at me on LinkedIn if you want to. I'm often on LinkedIn. For various reasons connected to this book, I try to leave social media alone as much as possible.
You'll understand why when you read it.
But so there you go. And there are websites out there. There is a Future of Truth thefutureoftruth.info is the website for the book. So
Fabulous.
Just choose your favorite and get in touch.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Lindley. It's
Pleasure.
been such a pleasure and definitely a pinch me moment. Now, because you're the first guest on in our new studio.
Love it.
Lucky you. And we're so excited. We're doing something a bit different. And to keep things interesting, I'm going to be introducing a wild card question.
Right.
Now, so you're saved from this because you're the first guest. So I'm going to, in a moment, ask you, as I wrap up the show, to write a wildcard question for the next guest.
Yes.
And this could be anything to do with resilience or something you're curious about. And guys, Lindley does not know who the next guest is, and you are not going to know what Lindley asks until the next show. So do stay tuned for that. So I'm going to pass you over my notebook and I'm going to ask you to write your question, and then we will close off. And then if you write your name and sign it and your question,
lovely,
that would be fantastic. And here is
so nice. Thank you.
Fabulous. Now, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And to our guest, Lindley Gooden, if you've enjoyed this episode, then by now you know what to do. So do that. Remember to stay tuned for the next episode to find out what Lindley's question is for our next guest. And that's it from me, your host, Rina Singh, and our guest, Lindley Gooden. Until next time, keep on investing in your resilience. That's all right.
Done.
Fabulous. Thank you. Love it.